Hey, welcome back to Business 150, Introduction to Management. In this, our last lecture in module number 7 on decision making, we look at the topic of group decision making, making decisions in groups. Now, at first blush, you hear that term. That may be one of the least favorite things you want to do at work, is make decisions in a group with a bunch of other people. Things seem to go slow. Seems to be way too much unnecessary conversation. No one seems to be able to make up their mind. Yes, it seems like it can be difficult. And yet at the same time, when we talk about group decision making, there are real benefits and advantages to the organization, to reaching an optimal solution, all those kinds of things. There is a great deal of truth to the saying that two heads are better than one. So, how do we understand group decision making? Well, as you can see, what we hope is that after this video, you will be able to summarize group decision techniques and the advantages and disadvantages of using group decision making in your organization. So, what is decision making in groups? Well, as you can see in this slide description, in more and more organizations today, groups rather than individuals are making most of the decisions. In fact, almost all of the significant and important decisions that have great potential consequences for the organization, positive and negative, typically nowadays those decisions will be made by more than one person and sometimes by an entire group. Today's complex, dynamic business world requires more specialized knowledge than one person can usually possess. That's just the way that business works these days, that you need to have someone with financial expertise, as well as technical expertise, as well as marketing expertise, as well as a good sense of where customers are at, as well as a whole sense of what production and operations can really pull off in a short period of time. In fact, you really do need representatives from each of those disciplines to comment intelligently in real time on what is possible, what the real source of the problem might be, what have you observed in terms of actual customer behavior, what's really going on, and therefore to just make the first step to really assess in a very dynamic, complex situation, what are the root causes, much less what really might be some viable, possible solutions and options. You need multidisciplinary knowledge, and therefore you need groups of specialized knowledge workers. And as a result, you see the third bullet point, most companies are forced to rely on groups of individuals to obtain the sufficient information and expertise needed to make sound business decisions. Companies that only rely upon one individual, well, they do so at their own peril, because the risk is, more and more so, that with the great flood of data and information that we're all experiencing, real sense-making is found in the power of groups, not in individuals. As a result, participative decision-making generally results in a number of things. You can see them right here. Greater job satisfaction, greater employee motivation, greater engagement and involvement with the organization. Because, why is this? Because people will naturally be more vested and committed to solutions that they help to create, instead of solutions that were simply handed to them by someone else. If people feel, even in small ways, that they're allowed to participate in the creation of a solution, they will be far more likely to be committed and to try harder, to be actually engaged with implementation of those solutions. And therefore, a couple of different group decision techniques have come to the forefront. You see them there. The first is brainstorming, which we've tried to illustrate with the image above. Brainstorming is a technique in which group members spontaneously suggest ideas to solve a problem. Now, let me go a little further than that. Brainstorming is not a free-for-all. Brainstorming is typically a structured, methodical process that does give a lot of latitude and room for free thinking. And so one of the ways that brainstorming often works in the real world is you set it up in phases. And the first phase of brainstorming is the time where everyone gets to volunteer their ideas without judgment and without analysis. In other words, one way it works is you hand everybody a pad of sticky notes and they can take some time, the open time, to write any idea you might have on a sticky note and stick it on the wall or stick it on the whiteboard. And there is absolutely no judgment or assessment. You can write anything that comes to mind, and it will be sifted through later. But in the first phase, this is not the time to sift through ideas. It's simply the time to generate ideas. And so everyone in the group is given a specified amount of time, typically a long period of time, maybe an hour or two, to brainstorm and come up with as many ideas as you possibly can and stick them up on the wall. And then the second phase, after that phase is complete, is then to sit down and read out all the ideas. And that way people, again, still without judgment, but you're all hearing the ideas so that you can make and collate ideas that seem to have perhaps similar resonance. Maybe more than one person suggested something close to the same idea, right? You're able to group the sticky notes by here's all the suggestions that have to do with the product, here's all the suggestions that have to do with perhaps production and marketing, etc., right? So you're able to group the ideas together. Again, you're simply collating them, but you're not really providing any in-depth criticism or analysis. That comes at the third phase. After you've grouped them together, that's where people get to volunteer the ideas they think have some real potential, have some real legs. You get to vote on those things, and those are the ones that then bubble up to the top, and you're able to analyze and criticize and provide some analysis for those kinds of ideas that float to the top that most people feel have some potential if they only have some time to examine it. And so you can see there, brainstorming is actually a set of techniques with an actual process in place that has some degree of freewheeling, come up with whatever you can, but then also goes through some more methodical process. Now, the second idea here, the second technique, the nominal group technique, involves the use of a highly structured meeting agenda and restricts the discussion and interpersonal communication during the decision-making process. What does this mean? It means that a moderator sets up a very clear-cut set of steps, and maybe the first set is not group discussion. It's that everyone in their own offices in solitude, without meeting together, first comes up with their ideas, and then those are posted up to the moderator. The moderator sifts through them and then provides an orderly setting for group discussion and interpersonal communication to have a different type of interaction than just everybody in a boardroom shouting out ideas. Now, more on this in the textbook, how a nominal group can work. There's a couple different iterations of this that you'll take note of, and you'll see at least some description in the textbook, but that's another common group decision technique. Now, making decisions in groups has advantages and disadvantages. So let's look at the advantages first. And these, of course, are potential advantages. You have to do some real work in order to realize these, but you can see the major advantages that group decision-making offers. It provides a greater pool of knowledge and information because different people have different domains of their own knowledge and expertise. It provides more experiences, more perspectives, and more sets of interests to the decision and to the salient parts of the decision. And so you get a richer, deeper, wider set of commentary on both the problem and possible solutions. And you can see there at point 3, you're more likely to generate more alternative solutions by having more people participate. And of course, that should be pretty intuitive. You can have more people clarify ambiguous problems. You can reduce uncertainty about certain alternatives and also increase intellectual stimulation. Most people who are creative think better when other people are prodding them, stirring them, challenging their ideas. I mean, politely and in a friendly way. But those kinds of things increase the degree of stimulation and thinking for everyone. It also helps for the entire group then to foster a greater comprehension of the decision. And that fosters increased acceptance of and commitment to the decision, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. And that way you have increased legitimacy because more people said, I did think that was a good idea. I'm one of the people who voted for this idea, right? And it provides a training ground for others to go on and then lead their own decision-making groups as well. It accomplishes, or it can accomplish, potentially all of these things, and that's one of the reasons why group decision-making is used more and more as a standard practice in contemporary organizations. But group decision-making is not without its set of potential disadvantages, and that's what we look at in this next slide. You know that anytime you get more than a couple people together to make a decision, it's going to take a while. It's time consuming, right? You're not just making the decision in your own head. People have to talk it out, and some people need to talk for a fair amount of time in order to talk it out. Also, when you have a group and everyone can talk, many times those groups are dominated by one or two very vocal members or very strong-willed members, and therefore it pays to have a good, experienced moderator to make sure that everyone's opinions are heard, not just the vocal one or two, and that the vocal one or two understand or helped to understand that while they may have a strong opinion, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, that we need to hear everyone out. Anytime you have groups working together, that means the group's going to be subject to social pressure. And that may sometimes lead to compromise decisions, to the group satisficing, as we mentioned before. You also, on a practical level, may end up with ambiguous decision responsibility. Who's actually responsible for making sure this thing gets implemented? Who's responsible for doing the necessary further research into particular alternatives? As a result, you may experience what we call goal displacement, that the actual original goal gets sort of moved and replaced by some other proximate or intermediate goal that the group thinks is more able to be achieved. And at its worst, you may end up with a group that's subject to what we call groupthink, which is everyone wanting to conform to the popular ideas so that they don't feel like the outsider. And so everyone's starting to think, or at least express their thoughts along the same lines for no particular reason other than social pressure. So those are some of the downsides that you might experience with group decision making, and it takes experience and patience and commitment to make sure that you don't fall victim to that. You need, as I mentioned, a strong moderator who's able to recognize the warning signs of these kinds of things occurring and are able to work against them or to nip them in the bud. These are necessary too for group decision making to actually work in real time. The table here, table 7.2, is reproduced from your textbook. Here are some common mistakes in group decision making you want to try to avoid if at all possible. You want to try to obtain adequate information. Don't simply rely on other people's interpretation. You want to get the information. You want to avoid developing conclusions based upon some member's personal bias. You want to still remain evidence-based as much as possible. You want to avoid overcommitting to current investments. It's very easy for a group together to reach the conclusion that at the end of the day we should just keep doing what we're doing, or we should just simply invest more in what we're doing already rather than think of a new solution. You need to avoid the group succumbing to groupthink, as mentioned earlier. You need to avoid the group becoming overconfident in predicting the outcomes, because that can be sort of a self-reinforcing feedback loop. People say, I think this is what's going to happen. I think you're right too. I think you're both right. I think this is really where it's going to end up. And unfortunately, groups can tend to be overconfident because you have more than one person agreeing with you that this is how the thing's likely going to come out. You also have to provide enough sufficient latitude for quiet people to be part of the open discussion. You need to have everyone contribute, or you fail to have open discussion in resolving problems. Number 6. Number 7, you have to avoid only presenting information that confirms a particular course of action. You have to be fair, and you have to be willing to hear out those with conflicting information that may actually erode or cause some disconcerting doubt about a particular course of action. Got to weigh all the evidence, and you have to avoid failing to delegate a decision to those with more knowledge. Okay, Don't forget, there may be people outside your group who have more pressing, more intelligent experience and knowledge about the matter at hand. Just because they're not in your group doesn't mean that their input is not valuable. Well, those are some common mistakes in group decision making. This list is by no means comprehensive. There are probably more as well. And you, in your own career and work life, may have experienced some that are not on this list. All right? We'd love for you to share those with us in the next class meeting, but nevertheless, you understand there are downsides to group decision making. Now, at the same time, group decision making is not going away because there's simply too many undeniable advantages in today's contemporary workplace. It's going to continue, and you're going to be part of it. You just need to know how to get the advantages out of group decision making while avoiding the common mistakes and pitfalls. Well, that is our short little video that concludes module number 7. We reached the end of the module, yay! And we hope that at the end of this video, you are able to summarize group decision techniques and the advantages and disadvantages of group decision making. Like I said, it's not going away. This becomes a very important part of how organizations in today's workplace make decisions. And so we hope that at the end of this module, with the information we've given you about how the classic model of decision making often looks versus how the real world, or as we call it, the administrative model of decision making actually happens with imperfect, incomplete knowledge and all the other things we talked about in that particular lecture, right? That as you understand how those things work in the real world, along with your personal decision making style, and realizing that that whole cocktail will probably be making decisions not only in solitude, in isolation by yourself, but also in the midst of working with others in groups as well. We hope that that provides you some tools and some comprehension, some concepts for you to evolve into a better decision maker than you were yesterday, and that you'll be a very fine decision maker, wise and full of insight tomorrow. That's our hope for module number 7. We will see you in the next module.